You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
All right, I have a question for you. A lot of business owners are of the opinion that they've got to do things themselves, right? And yet, I think there's a real development in a business owner mindset when you get to a point where you recognize you can't do everything yourself, that there's got to be some point of delegation, which is not abdication, but collaboration with people to allow you to use your strengths and use their strengths, and it really can elevate where your business is. Have you found that in yours?
Oh, definitely. I think I got lucky from being able to learn so much from you and see how you ran your business for so long. And then also I had the opportunity to see and work closely with leaders that did the opposite, that felt like they needed to do everything themselves. Mm-hmm. So when I started my business, it became, right from day one, it was too much work for me to do alone. And so I had, people on my team who I had to rely on them, and not only rely on them to do the work, but I have to rely on them to make decisions. And so that was a journey for me to kind of consistently empower them to make choices on my behalf in the business. Because, hey, you know this role more than me. If you don't know it more than me, you're going to learn it quick. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get to be more competent and knowledgeable than me very soon. And setting them up to make really important choices, because I can't make every important choice in my business. I certainly can't make all choices, but I can't even make all of the important choices.
Right.
And so I'm like addicted to it now.
Well, I think it's important to make sure that they're grounded in the right fundamentals, that you say, here we're trying to create this sort of emotion in a client or a customer, or we're trying, or this is our purpose. And that once you've got that clear, then releasing those decisions to other people becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I love when I find those opportunities to push an employee past their comfort zone. When I say, hey, you're gonna make the decisions on this. You're gonna design this project. You're gonna do it. You're not gonna check in with me at every step. I'm not gonna micromanage it for you. And sometimes they hear me give that instruction, they're overwhelmed, or they're scared, or it seems really big, but I know they're gonna improve. We're gonna be better as a team. And part of why it's become really easy for me to trust in others to make important choices in my business is because I don't look at the business as being my business. I'm leading the company, and I have the financial responsibility for the company, but my business is my business as much as my life is my life. Ultimately, it belongs to God, and this business exists to serve God, and my life should exist to serve God. Do we perfectly do that every single day and every decision? No, but we're definitely trying to move in that direction. So when we surrender the mission to the ultimate mission, when we surrender our own mission to the ultimate mission of God, it's easier to surrender decision-making to others, as long as they're motivated by that same mission. Danielle Strickland joined the podcast today. She's an acclaimed author, speaker, and advocate who inspires, challenges, and disrupts the present to create a better future. With a global perspective shaped by living in diverse cultures, she celebrates the beauty of diversity and passionately works toward justice and making wrong things right. Her daily pursuit of following Jesus has led her to co-found multiple charities and nonprofits, while also embracing a multitude of failures that have deepened her understanding of the profound need for hope, faith, and love. She's the author of 6 books, including The Other Side of Hope, host of the podcast The Right Side Up with over 500,000 downloads, and sought-after speaker at events worldwide. She leads the Boundless Communications, Inc., launching creative ventures like the Women Speakers Collective, IMBY, a tiny home movement called In My Backyard, Brave Global, which works to fight human trafficking, Infinitum, which embraces a deeply lived life, and Hagar's Voice, supports survivors of sexual abuse. We covered great topics like who God really is. Danielle shared her 3 daily postures with us. We talked about surrendering your life and your business to God and how to align your decision-making in a faith-based way. Stick around. You'll learn something from Danielle's inspiring wisdom. I'm Sanger Smith. As always, I'm with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. Danielle, thanks for patiently navigating the waters of tech, snafus with us this morning.
Yeah, it's like our first leadership lesson, right? Always be ready to adapt.
And be patient. We could be yelling and screaming at each other. And Sean and I would be if you wouldn't have been able to hear us the whole time.
That is a good leadership lesson, because sometimes it takes a while to just get things right so that you get a better result rather than just kind of rushing through.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have you here today, because sometimes I think that I'm doing good and I'm giving back, and then I meet Danielle, who's got 47 charities.
Yeah, Danielle, save a charity or two for somebody else to start.
Save a cause for one of us to focus on.
Holy cow.
There's so many male jokes hanging around here that I could make, but I'm going to refrain.
You can go for that. That would be welcome here.
Just be like, if the men could just keep up, I wouldn't have to do so much. Something like that.
There you go. We're getting, it's the 2020s. We're getting left in the dust on everything.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in that from where you started? Take me back a little bit from where you started and what drew you into the ministry and so many of the different causes that are important to you.
Yeah, you know what? I had a pretty significant impact via the Salvation Army. So the Salvation Army kind of plays this role in my family's trajectory. So a couple of Salvation Army officers kind of rescued my parents from their orphaned realities and their violence situations. And then I myself kind of had this like full-on revisit of the dysfunctional kind of addiction type stuff that came through some abuse and some misunderstandings of faith. And again, was highly impacted by the role of the Salvation Army in its sort of missional impetus to believe that everything and everyone is redeemable and that it is not too late, not too hard. And so I think that ethos, really, really sunk in kind of into my DNA, that like it is not too hard, that God has these purposes for people, even whether or not people can see it or not, and wants to redeem all things. And I think that's kind of like this thread that's run through a lot of the things that I do.
Yeah. So a lot of the causes that you are passionate about, that you work in, deal with, I think there's a common theme. There's people there's been abuse, there's been you mentioned the phrase misunderstanding of faith.
Well, I think I believed a lie, which is that God is boring and kind of authoritative. And really the dominant idea that God has is to just like make people behave and punish them if they misbehave. And somewhere along the line, I missed this idea of this kind of core understanding of God as this loving presence in the world, trying to redeem and restore and bring everything into a mutual flourishing. And that's like a pretty big misunderstanding of God. And I think people who are stuck misunderstanding God as like either a CEO in an office trying to run a business or as like an authoritative parent trying to control, they miss the element of what we even exist for, why we're here and why it matters, and that connection to God in a way that can bring about some beautiful things.
Yeah, I think a lot of us get that sort of impression early on. It's that authoritative, man in the sky that's going to punish you, that lays down the rules. And I think it's a way that we're controlled by our parents early on, and that's the only understanding that we have.
That's a necessary development of one's own faith relationship, I think. Is when we're young, we have a limited ability to comprehend an understanding of our own faith, right? So most of us, when we're young children, we have an anthropomorphized view of God, and our ability to understand is limited to simple stories. And the beauty of biblical stories is they're written that they could be understood by a 4-year-old and an 80-year-old, right? You can kind of evolve throughout your life your own understanding of one individual story. But I think most of our relationship, at least in the Christian churches, learning particularly Old Testament stories, where God is a little bit more authoritative than, the redemption story, than, Christ, who is not as authoritative. But I think that seems to be like a necessary component of one's own faith journey.
Wow. I mean, I would be so happy if that's what it could be. I mean, I think my faith is not a journey through sort of Old Testament stories of God, and then, sort of this. My faith is really an encounter I had with Jesus, and so Jesus is, I believe, the full revelation of who God is. That's sort of this presentation of Jesus in the world, is if you want to know what God is like, you look no further than Jesus. And I think one of the problems, and I think this is the thing that kept me from God, is that I didn't see God through the lens of Jesus. I saw Jesus sort of as this like exceptional human, and I think I heard that Jesus is God somehow, but I kind of had this idea that there was this like God who was like mad at me, and then there was like Jesus who's like kind to me. But I think that's actually, I think it's heretical. And actually, I think the heresy of it is that it keeps people believing a lie that separates them because of a wrong kind of fear. Not the kind of fear that's like reverent and awe and wonderful and like mind-blowing, but the kind of fear that's like, I'm out of here. I don't want to be part of this, this God. And it might also have to do, like, I would imagine you had a fantastic dad. So maybe the idea of God as a parent, isn't, certainly here you're going to agree with that. But so maybe it also has an idea of like development. Like if you had great parents, and that idea of God as a parent works super well. I mean, and if you have terrible parents, it doesn't. At the same
time, when you're 12, like you don't think your parents are great. Yeah, no matter how great your parents are as a teenager, your parents stink. So I did have great
maybe
parents.
They're not. Yeah, but they maybe don't like hit you or beat you or
for sure. That I didn't.
So like you're not gonna right. Yeah. Anyway, it's really fascinating, I think. But what's been really interesting to me over the last probably decade or so of my life is the recentering, kind of the recentering of Jesus at the core of who I am and my faith system has been so incredibly liberating, and has been so incredibly, what would I say, like encouraging, like inspiring. Like I've never kind of been more convinced, even in an age of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of despair, I've never been more convinced that God is on the move, that like love is the answer, that people can experience a living faith that can awaken them. So I mean, I really believe that this character, this person, this living presence of Jesus is the center of what it means to be a Christian.
So you were at one point in your life viewing God and Jesus as two separate beings, not viewing God through the lens of Christ, and that was limiting your own understanding and relationship with God. What was the impetus for that revelation that you were referring to?
I was going to ask that same question. That's a good question.
Well, you know what? I would say this is a growth area in my life because I think it's so embedded. And I think a lot of Christians that I talk to, this is embedded. They have these separate ideas of like God of the Old Testament and then God of the New Testament. And this idea that there are like these two sides of God or something like that.
Gods, yeah.
Yeah. Or even just two, like I think you even said this, like that emphasis on one and the emphasis on another.
And when I was saying that, I feel like, maybe I'm superimposing a little bit of my own personal experience on this bigger idea, but I think even if you didn't grow up in the church, the stories of the Bible. Most people know Noah's Ark. Most people know Cain and Abel. And the stories that are most commonly spoken about are Old Testament stories. I don't think there are as many stories that the average person could articulate from the New Testament other than, the overarching theme of Jesus. They go, oh yeah, Jesus, but pick out a few stories. I think they're going to go to the Genesis story.
Yeah, Genesis, Exodus. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there are beautiful things in there, but I just think everything needs to be read through the lens of the fullest revelation of God, which is Christ, right? That's Colossians, like the fullness of the deity resides in Jesus. So if you're looking for a picture of God, you will find the fullest revelation of God in the person of Jesus. So there's a theologian that says, we spent a decade trying to prove to everybody that Jesus was God. And it is now time to let everybody know that God is Jesus. And I think that's a beautiful, I think that's a beautiful emphasis. For me, the real awakening, I would say the first kind of awakening of like, oh, God is real, God is love, and God is for me, happened in like a jail cell. And I was like a juvenile delinquent, and I was separated from my family and causing a lot of harm and pretty much dead on the inside. And I had somebody come and visit me, a leader who came and visit me, slipped me a lawyer card, and said that she loved me, which was bizarre because I was not at all open to that. I was not grateful for that. I didn't even want to see her. And then when she left, I was alone in my jail cell, and I had a revelation of Jesus, who came and did the same thing. He hugged me and he said, "I love you." And I would say I still didn't understand fully what it meant to live a surrendered life or what it meant to follow Jesus. But I did see clearly for the first time that what I was involved in was not good, and that there was something other, and that God actually was for me and loved me. So that revelation of Jesus has been so central to the story and has really just kind of grown in really beautiful ways.
It seems like, you were at a point where you probably felt really limited, stuck. What changed other than this revelation that Jesus was God and there was that connection? How did that change how you moved forward and made decisions that changed the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, I think I slipped back into like a religious impulse of like, I remember having this revelation going like, okay, whoa, God is not out to get me. He's not keeping, this record, and he's going to judge me. He loves me. He's for me. He's going to help me. So it was like and then I also saw this life that I was living as a lie, because I had believed that rebellion would lead to freedom. And that freedom is ultimately this like expression of myself in whatever way I like, no matter what it does to other people, no matter what it does to me. So I think I saw the light, if that makes sense. It's like that I saw the light, but I literally brought revelation to my situation. But then I think my impulse, which I think a lot of people's impulse, is to go back to this, like, I better clean up my life. Like, I better get things in order. And again, we slip back into this kind of religious impulse, which is to try to get it right. And that didn't go well for me. I just couldn't do it. I'm really not very good at being good. And so I had to come to another place where I was like, oh, I see, I can't do this. Even if I have a right vision of who God is, me trying to fix my life and earn my life for that, to please this person, even if it's out of a loving motive, is not going to work. I kind of liken it to trying to take a shower without water. It hurts if you've ever tried it, and it doesn't work very well. And I think that's kind of religion. It hurts and it doesn't work very well.
Fighting the impulse to fix things on your own. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Fixing it on your own, but also like kind of earn or like pay back, or to try to work my way into the good books. Can be driven out of fear, but it can also be driven out of devotion. It can be driven out of love. It's just the same. It's the same behavior in the end, where we have this like to-do list of, it's basically behavior modification. And in the hopes that I might be good enough, what I had to do is I had to get to a place where I surrendered that impulse, and I surrendered my whole life to a power greater than myself. So that power is God, that power is love, that power is Jesus specifically. And that is something that I've learned I practice every day. It's not just a decision I made, 30 years ago. This is a decision I made this morning to surrender my life to God, to surrender my life to the person of Jesus today, with all of its burdens, with all of its successes, with all of its whatever. And then I've just made this a daily practice. My faith, I believe, needs to be practiced on a daily basis for it to be alive, for it to be real. Otherwise, it's just a belief system. Faith as a belief system is not going to do it. But faith as a practice, as daily decisions to walk towards and to walk with God, that's life-changing.
So how do you juxtapose these two seemingly competitive beliefs? And I'm saying this out of curiosity, not as a challenge. Or here you say on one hand, a religion is not going to do it. Religion's like taking a shower without water. And at the same time, faith without practice is nothing more than a belief system, right? It's not actually going to yield the fruits. So some people would say, well, the religion is the structure of that is how I put my faith into practice.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes it can just be semantics. What I would say is one's externally based and one's internally based. So the idea of an external, like something outside of you that's happening that somehow will get you to God, is pretty much the basis for every religion, except Christianity, which is the idea that the Spirit of God, the living Christ, is at work inside of us. And so to surrender to God's Spirit and to receive freely what God has done is the means by which we work out our salvation on a daily basis. So I think for me, the practice is not so much external things I have to do to earn my way to God. The practice is the rehearsing of receiving what God has done for me and then living my life out of that salvation, living my life out of that gift, living my life out of that love that I receive every day.
So one of the things I think that's inherent, and certainly it's amplified for those who have a religious bias, is you have this conscience that tells you when you're disconnected from that ideal self. When you've gone astray, you get that voice, you get that feeling that's powerful. And it's important not to ignore that. That can help you realize you've made a mistake in a decision. How are you using your faith to make sure you don't make a bad decision? In other words, ahead of time to stay on the right path.
So I think that the greatest calling of all of our lives, I mean, Jesus summed this up when he said, like, what you need to do. And it's funny, he's talking to a wealthy, successful leader who is also devoted to God. And he says, what must I do to be saved? Like, if you could sum up the whole thing in like a quick sentence, what do I do? And he says, you got to love God with everything you have. And then you have to love others as you love yourself. So basically he's saying it really is about the way we love. And so for me, I had to ask this question, like, does my life look like love? Like, if someone were to look at my life today, would they go, oh, hey, that life looks like love. It looks like someone who is loving God. It looks like someone who's loving others. And it looks like someone who loves themselves too. There is this ethos of love here. And then I sat down with some friends, all of us pretty successful in our various things. And we really asked ourselves that question, like, are our lives characterized by love? And then are we really following Jesus? Like, is this a thing that we're doing every day? And it was a fascinating conversation just about what does it mean to be someone who is open to the living, not this belief system of a person that exists, but like a living presence saying, hey, I've got wisdom for you. I've got strength for you. I've got, things for you to respond to. I've got what you need. So that's when I started practicing kind of these three postures, I call them, which is surrender every day. And then it's generosity, which I've discovered is mutuality. It's mutual, which was like mind-blowing to me, by the way, that generosity was this principle that Jesus keeps teaching his disciples, which is freely you receive, now freely give. So there is this like, I'm receiving what I need, including every day I pray for wisdom, I pray for direction, I pray for guidance, I pray for strength, I pray for mercy, I pray for forgiveness, and then everything that I've so freely received, which is its own practice. Because again, if we flip back into this, like, I'm going to try harder, I'm going to do better, what I find is we're short on the things that we don't have. You can't give what you don't have. So when I find myself short on mercy, or I find myself short on forgiveness, or I find myself short on whatever, I realize, oh, I see, I need to receive. From the inexhaustible resources of God, I need to receive again and remind myself that I am receiving what I cannot get for myself, and then give it. And then the final posture is just to be open to others, which is a missional posture, which is to say that my life exists not for self-actualization. That's not the pinnacle of my pursuit. My life exists for the pinnacle of mutual flourishing, which is when everybody discovers who they are, what they were born for, and what they could do for the world and for each other.
That's interesting. A lot of people, when they talk about self-actualization, they look at that as the highest you can go. But it's, on Maslow's hierarchy, moving to transcendence, which I think speaks a lot towards this openness to others that you were talking about.
Yeah. And I mean, it does make sense, doesn't it? Because a lot of the most self-actualized people don't always seem to live the most fulfilled lives. And so that's an interesting, the fact that we keep believing this idea that like, if I could be, self-actualized, I would be at the top of this pyramid of success or whatever. But then you kind of go, oh, that all looks a little bit sad.
There's more.
There's more. Right.
Yeah. And that lines up with James Fowler's work on stages of faith development. That he puts at the sixth and final stage is that transcendentalism. But he says that hardly anyone ever gets there. And so maybe in a way, like, that it's the journey and the pursuit of that is of value. And only a few people, and their names, have achieved that that true transcendence, right? And maybe really only one, and that's Jesus, achieved true transcendence. But most of us aren't going to even get a glimpse of what it means to really transcend. I guess in a way we're all transcending if you're a believer and you have that transcendence of death. But I'm not. I guess. Am I explaining this well, Danielle? Probably not.
Well, I think, again, it depends on what you think of by transcendence. Like, I think, again, we can have this like crazy, so the only person in the world that experienced transcendence, I guess, through the resurrection is Jesus, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
But I would say that every time you move past your own self-actualization in order to help somebody else. So and we see this all through the New Testament. I mean, the believers are literally, like the disciples are literally transformed by the living Spirit of Christ within them to start giving their lives away for other people, to start like loving people more than themselves, which is literally what Jesus said is transcendence. So I would say every time you touch it, we literally every day we could touch this by choosing to serve others when it costs us something. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the transcendence. But it might not just look as glorious, we think, because actually it looks really painful and difficult and ugly and isn't even always celebrated. People think like, oh, you're a doormat, or that's dumb because you really should be aiming for self-actualization. But actually, I think you touch it, you feel it, and you know it when you see it. When people see acts of, self-giving, which I think would be this transcendence piece, when they've died to themselves and lived to something greater than them, it's very impactful, right? Like and this is in my life, even in my leadership life, I remember serving with this woman, retired leader who lived this way. And I was like, who is this? What is happening right now? Like on a daily basis, she knew who she was. She wasn't leading out of any sense of pleasing, or she wasn't trying to prove something. She just lived in a way that looked a lot like Jesus. And I remember going like, how do you do this? How do you lead this way? And so it was cool because I actually have seen it. I think that's the thing, is I have seen it modeled. And whenever you catch a glimpse of it, it is breathtaking. And so then the question becomes, do we want to just keep this transcendence thing as like this thing we cannot do? Or do we want to say, actually, I think we could live this way? And I think that's what Jesus was inviting us to do.
Yeah, I guess in a way, it's like you're never gonna get it perfect, but you can definitely embody it in a really powerful way. But none of us humans, even the most impressive, would ever say, "Hey, we figured it out 100%."
Yeah, and I think that's why I really love using words like practice and posture and daily and tomorrow we begin again kind of thing, is that we are on a daily basis. I am really trying to be led by, receive from, and give out of the life of Jesus and what he invites me into.
So tell us a little bit about how you're implementing this for other business or other folks, beyond you now.
Yeah. So what we do, so this thing that I practice, I also give away to others to practice too. So if it's it's helpful to anybody to sort of need like a basic framework on how to open to and then live into this person of Jesus, then it's called Infinitum, infinitumlife.com if you want to go to the website. But basically, it's this framework. So I was in relationship with a guy who started his own business, and he does this as a business. There's quite a successful business in the UK, public relations firm. And he goes in the morning to this place, this building, and he literally stands in the building before any of the employees get there. And he just says, like, I surrender this business to God. This business is no longer mine. It belongs to you, God, with all of its, burdens, but also with all of its capacities. And then he opens his hands, like I use postures, and he just says, like, I need from you. I need some things. I need courage and I need wisdom and I need all these things. I need these things from you. And then I'm going to give these away to the people around me today. And then he opens his arms up and he just says, this business does not just exist for us. It exists for others. And so he told me the story. It's quite beautiful. He said it began to transform the way he even thought about his business. It began to transform the way that he interacted with people. It began to transform the way that they thought about themselves. So they actually started to take on projects. Like as they started practicing kind of the ethos of this, they began to take on projects that were past self-actualization, like we were just talking about. So it was just not like the bottom line or how much money they were making. It was kind of also how much good they were doing for others. And they started taking on, like they did the PR project for welcoming refugees in the UK and all these, out of this kind of idea of like, what if we practiced a different way of living? I talked to a guy that was like the lawyer that handled human trafficking cases. And he did the same thing. When I went into his office, he had these 3 words on his desk: surrender, generous, and mission. And he said over every case that he tried, he just would pray, I surrender this case to you. Please, God, give me what I need so that I can be generous with my time and my mind and my resources. And then also may this case actually help people who feel invisible and feel like there's no justice. So I think that for me, it's not like, I think for me, it's like it's a heart posture that begins to actually take some real tangible steps towards living like Jesus. So there's all kinds of ways to engage in this if it's helpful to you. There's YouVersion Bible reading plans you could do with a friend. There's a 30-day challenge if you wanted to kind of kick off. What would it look like if I had a couple of younger people reach out to me and say, like, is it okay if I invite my friends to do a 30-day challenge, which is like daily postures and prayer, and you connect with a group and just try to live this authentic life, like a real practice of your faith? And could I invite some friends who wouldn't call themselves Christians, but they might want to try it out and see what it might be like to follow Jesus? And then and I was like, yes, of course, like 100%. Then I started realizing, oh yeah, that's actually what Jesus did. Yeah. Right? He was like, come try this out and see if you're going to stick around. So there's all kinds of different ways, but it just, in my life, it was such a game changer going from this, I believe these really important truths, and I even like go to church and I talk about it maybe and I think about it, to this like, oh, what would it look like if I embodied this, if I practiced this? And maybe it wouldn't be so hard. It would just be this attitude and this heart and this mind that opens to the possibility that Jesus is doing this with me.
It's interesting, taking that stance with a business of just sort of surrendering and having a mindset of generosity and submission. I see that in a lot of, maybe more and more in some secular businesses. You look at boundless socks, so they're giving away socks, or Tom's shoes, are giving away shoes. And I don't know their faith, but they're not holding themselves out to be religious. They're holding themselves out to a greater purpose of helping people. Do you think they're getting to the same type of results? I
think they are at least hungry for a similar thing. So I think that's important to recognize. Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that there is a culture that's longing for people who live for something greater than themselves. So those are all beautiful signs, aren't they? And then I think the only true way, sort of from an inside out, from a true transformational perspective to achieve this ultimately is through Jesus, right? I believe that that's actually, but you might be able to kind of touch it and go like, ooh, I love this. Like, this is grace, or if you see hope on display, how people are like, hope, like they love hope. And you're like, actually, I know where that hope comes from. That hope comes from God, right? That's the scriptures say, like literally the author of all hope is God. But I think to see it, sometimes I think it would be better to not dismiss what is good and true and kind of holy or sacred, and instead say, hey, would you like more? Or would you like to know the source? Or would you like to know the name of what this is? That's kind of cool. But I do think there is a deep hunger for this, because I do think a culture has come to the end of itself, which is actually fantastic news. Because that's where we get that core teachings of Jesus, where he said, blessed are you who are poor in spirit, who just like literally can't do it, because that's where you begin to touch and see that the kingdom of heaven is near.
Yeah, if those companies are pursuing something good and true and transcendent, then they are embodying unknowingly the Holy Spirit, right? They are guided. Yeah. Even if they reject it vocally, they say, no, we are not a Christian company. We are not a faith-based. We don't follow Jesus. We don't believe in God. Well, regardless, because you are pursuing what is good and true and everlasting, you are following God's word, but you can't do it fully while also rejecting the word of God at the same time. You said something really, and then it left my brain. As soon as I was going to ask you. Oh my gosh. That's so, well,
I'm glad you're not the only one. That happens to me a lot.
But. So as I'm listening to you say, hey, these are some ways that we put into practice as business leaders, put our faith into our business and improve our decision making so that it's aligned with faith. Like I'm hearing these steps that at the same time sound so simple, but I know that it's not, right? It's like if I could distill everything that you've said, it's all things that I already know. Like, well, surrender my business to God. Well, duh. You surrender your life to God. That's what Christ calls us to do. Okay, so then I should surrender all aspects of my life. My business is included in that life. So if I've surrendered my life, then I have surrendered my business, but there's a benefit in saying that explicitly. Hey, pray before my big decisions. Okay, well, yeah. Why am I not doing that? Why am I not doing these things that are so simple and straightforward? But at the same time, because it's simple, it doesn't make it easy. And I think, like, from my perspective, what maybe I was looking for you to say is, hey, here's this really complex strategy of 27 steps, and this is how Danielle's figured it out. And I go, oh, okay. And then maybe I wanted that because then I could say, well, that's really too hard, or
that's why I'm not doing it. It's more difficult than I thought. Yeah.
I forgot a couple steps, She told me all 27, but I only remember 23. So therefore I can't really get there. But we can get there through a surrender and through prayer. And
are you frustrated that she boiled it down to like 2 or 3 things?
Yeah. Make it harder, please. Make it really like complicated.
Yeah, that's a recovery. I've dealt with a lot. I've done recovery and helped people in recovery, and that's one of their principles: is simple isn't easy.
It's not the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. And I think sometimes we're prone to dismiss things that are simple because they're easy. But if we would just try them, and that's a little rule of thumb, even as someone who's a communicator, is I always say, like, if I actually am not practicing, at least trying to practice what I'm preaching, I really should just shut up. It is not helpful. And I think sometimes we do that with principles in general, in business and everything. We have these big, huge value statements, or we have these massive sort of like, theologically rich ideas or philosophically good ideas or whatever. But they're literally meaningless without practice. We know this. And so I would say, bring it down. Bring it all down to some simple things that people could actually do that might move them towards this life that they want to live. And And if we could actually start doing that, and that's what actually happened with me around a group of table with all these leaders, is we said, what if we actually practice the things that we teach others to do? This is so embarrassing to say.
Yeah.
And
mind blowing.
and then so that's what we did. And we actually said, let's not tell anybody that we're going to do this for a year. And we did it. We just literally every day I did this. Every week I met with a group and we asked each other good questions. And then every month I decided to serve in a way that didn't benefit myself. And by the end of the year, I had never been more hopeful. I had never been more filled with joy. I had never been, and I just was like, oh, wow, it works, this whole following Jesus thing.
Yeah, that's something that made me, I kind of had to open my eyes when an employee suggested to me that we do a devotional in our daily huddle meeting. So we have a phone call every morning at 8 a.m. We all get on a conference call. It's 5 minutes, Hey, how are you doing? Are you stuck on anything? Tons of companies do it. She goes, why don't we do a devotional at that time? And I wanted, when she said it, my instinctual response was no. I didn't say that out loud, but I wanted to say no. And maybe I wanted to say no because, it put me, I was uncomfortable with having to lead spiritually people that I'm already leading in this other way. And I was like, I wanted to say no, but I knew that she was right. Like, hey, this is a shared belief that all of us on this team have talked with each other about sharing, right? We it's not going to make Johnny in accounting uncomfortable because he's Buddhist or something. Like, I can't use that as an excuse. And I still didn't want to do it. And so the next level is like, why are we not praying together as a company? One of my clients, he does that at every weekly team meeting. He's like, well, the first thing we do is we pray. Well, duh, why are we not doing that? And I think it boils down to that idea that you shared a second ago, which is one simple isn't easy, but the mind-blowing revelation is you got to just practice what you preach. I mean, that is the simple way to distill a lot of what we're talking about. But that idea of simple not being easy, man, that really is true with everything in life. I mean, that's true with your money. Live within your means. Save money. Like, there you go. There's your 2-step financial plan. If you do that, right, you're not gonna screw it up, right? That was advice that Sean gave me when I started my career. He said, if you just do the right thing and you do what you say you're going to do, you're going to be fine. Really? He goes, yeah,
and
it's
also,
simple.
and do the thing in front of you. So again, people get tripped up, I think, not only in faith, but also in everything else, where you're so focused on this final thing instead of this thing right here. And so a lot of people want to skip all this thing right here. And I always, people are like, how do I get there? How do I do this? How do I achieve that? I'm like, just do this thing right here today. Honestly, trust me. If we do this thing, we're going to get to that thing, but we're not going to get to that thing not doing this thing.
Yeah.
I
love that idea that simple and easy are not the same. People often come to me looking for some magic trick or some complex strategy that's going to prevent them from having to do the simple things that aren't easy. Hey, what do I do if I haven't saved money and I have spent outside of my means? So now what's the complex, really cool thing that I could do? Go back and do the hard, simple.
Yeah, I have come across that so often in my career that people who are approaching retirement will come to a financial advisor hoping for some combination of Warren Buffett and Harry Potter to where they could solve the issue that they've created over 30 years, that there's some magic as they wrestle with the reality of their situation.
Yeah, that's true with
but it is simple. You're right.
It's true with your health. Like, I heard this interview on YouTube. I don't even remember who it was. Guy goes, hey man, so what's the quickest, easiest way for me to get a 6-pack?
Yes.
What are you talking about? It's not easy. It is simple though. Yeah. You work out and you eat right. There you go. You don't have, there's not some weird exercise that you have to do.
That's like a Jay Leno, I think, line, isn't it? That he said, I'll do anything for the perfect body except diet and exercise.
I'll take any pill. Any
pill you want to give me, I'll take.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to something that you were saying earlier, Danielle. You said you think that our culture is, and our world is really striving for people and businesses that are living outside of themselves or serving something bigger, right? So do you think that is something that is happening in our culture because that is a basic human desire that exists throughout time, will always be there? Or is there something unique that's happening, some cultural moment going on right now and some other reason why we're maybe a little bit more hungry for it now than we were in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely a generational shift where a generation cares about things a bit differently. And maybe some of that has to do with kind of seeing through the other side to go like, oh, that maybe doesn't look as good as I thought it might look. So I think there might be some of that. I think we're in the middle of an era shift. So I think Mark Sayers wrote a book called A Non-Anxious Presence. And in there, he kind of looks through sort of historical era shifts. And that's the thing he decides in that book, that he thinks we're in this era shift, so that the future, we're in this 50-year gray zone, they call it, between eras. That's what he suggests. And it makes a lot of sense in that we know this era is coming to an end, and it has all the signs of that. So like there's a lot of things not working that used to work in terms, I would say, political systems and economics and like institutional faith structures, like all kinds of things that are just like, they're not working. But the things that it is gonna look like in the future aren't here yet. And so they call that the gray zone, the 50-year gray zone. And Mark's book is more around how do we be a non-anxious presence in the gray zone, where of course we're anxious because nobody has a clue how this is gonna work. I think that in that gray zone, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of despair and a lot of sort of apocalyptic angst, right? We can feel it in the movies. We can see it in the TV and the news, and like a generation sort of saying like, is there even a future for me? So I think that angst has a capacity to either move us towards despair or move us towards, I guess what I would say is like renewal or revival, or like a redemption, in a sense of like, what is good and true and meaning? How do we want to live in the future? So I think there's a whole bunch of things. I also think the impulse in this season for leaders are to either revert to what used to work and like dig in and say like, hey, this worked 100 years ago and it has for the last 100 years, so it must be true. Or some leaders who are like jumping to the future before we're ready for that, out of a sense of anxiety and missing. So I think that's all that kind of like AI stuff where we're like, what have we done? Because we did it too early, because we couldn't wait, because we had to get ahead of the competitor and like all this stuff. So I think this brings me back to this, like, what if just today, which is, how you deal with anxiety and despair and existential dread, is you stop the big picture and you come down to today's picture and you say, my feet are right here. I'm rooted and I'm okay. I'm in this community and there are people around me I need to love. And there's a thing I should do with my life. And there's an open place. So I think a whole bunch of things, but I do think generationally that there's a generation that is looking for something bigger than just self-accusation. Oh, what is it? Accusation.
Whatever
that is.
Well, Danielle, thanks. I have one final question. If you had to narrow it down to one takeaway, what's your biggest decision-making tip for business leaders that they should know about?
Business leaders that are followers of Jesus, I would use this Jesuit principle, which is a decision-making principle that says, will this decision I'm making right now move me towards Jesus or away from him?
Yeah, it's a good one.
That one's gonna hurt me later. That one's gonna come back and by hurt me, I mean benefit me greatly, but frustrate me because I'm going to have to reconcile with this question. Asking yourself that when you want to do something that's you're pulled and you have a desire to do something, and then you ask that question, I can already see it going, oh, no, that's not going to work out well. I know the answer. Oh, yeah.
Right.
That's great. Can you say it one more time? Will this decision pull me closer or further from Jesus?
Yeah. Will this decision I'm making right now move me towards Jesus or move me away from him?
That's good. Thank you so much for being here. am fascinated by this conversation, fascinated by the work that you do. And I really appreciate it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thanks, guys. It's been an honor. Thanks for having me.
My takeaway from our discussion with Danielle was when she was talking about the Jesuit principle and having a starting point of surrender. You're not going to be able to do things on your own, and then moving to a point of generosity and service. That really can guide decision making in a positive way, so that you're open to others and how you're transforming the gifts of your values to others for sort of a more eternal benefit. I think that's if you're making decisions along those lines, probably on the right path.
My biggest takeaway is surrender broadly. I mean, she talked about surrendering your life, surrendering your business, surrendering individual cases or projects. Or the idea of surrender, that's going to be a lot bigger focus in my life on a big scale, macro, and on a micro level.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support. It helps others find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more daily decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Decidedly Podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Sanger Smith, and this is Decidedly.
Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.